Okay, colleagues, good morning. We're officially in open session and remind members that the meeting will be broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. At this stage, happy to note any apologies, which I don't believe we have any. So joining us online, Sinead McLaughlin, Padraig Delargy and Gary Middleton, and then the rest of the members are here in the room. Our clerk, Peter, is unwell today, so we are ably assisted by Roisin Kelly, who is another clerk here at the Assembly, and we send our best wishes to Peter. Declarations of interest, members, does any have any they want to declare at this stage? None. Moving to chairperson's business, members, I have none at this stage. Draft minutes then is item 4 at page 7 of our packs. Are members content that this is a true and accurate reflection of our deliberations last week? Yep, members are content.
Right.
Thank you. We then move to matters arising. Are there any items that members wish to raise at this stage which aren't covered later in the agenda pack? None. We'll then move to item 6, which is the first of our evidence sessions from the Department on Technology Sector Action Plans. The clerk's covering note is at page 22. Members, the Department has provided a brief overview of their sectoral plans at page 32, and copies of these range from page 38 to 147. Colleagues, you're very welcome here today. We have Alan Ramsey, who is the Director for International Trade and Investment at the Department, and Jeremy Fitch, who'll be known to members, who is the Executive Director of Business Growth at Invest Northern Ireland. Colleagues, you are both very welcome.
Thank you.
I'll hand over to you if you wish to give the committee an overview then of the plans that have been submitted by the Department at this stage.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. I'll just start with a very short opening statement, Chair, if that's okay.
Sure.
My name, as you say, is Alan Ramsey. I'm the Director for International Trade and Investment in the Department. Again, thanks for the opportunity to come and brief you on the sector plans. We've referred to these plans as our most innovative, most productive and most internationally orientated parts of the economy. And that's where we want to give a focus in terms of economic policy development. Hopefully you've previously received written briefing in relation to the development of the plans, including the outcomes of the public consultation which finished last November, and copies of the plans around publication in June. So as you're aware, in February of this year, the Minister came into post and set out his economic objectives for the remainder of the mandate, and set 4 strategic objectives for that mission, which you're well familiar with: increasing the number of good jobs, improving regional balance, raising productivity and reducing carbon emissions. As part of the contribution to realising these objectives, we've been working in collaboration with industry, with academia, with InvestNI and other delivery partners and stakeholders to take forward quite a lot of research and analysis to develop the action plans to support those high potential sectors in a strategic and tailored way. So the plans cover the following sectors: software including cyber, fintech and financial services, screen and creative industries, agri-tech, life and health sciences, advanced manufacturing, materials and engineering, and low carbon and net zero. We believe these sectors have huge scale-up potential, and supported in the right way can grow further to support the Minister's objectives. The action plans have set out a range of activities under 4 broad themes. The first theme is collaboration. So that's about strengthening existing collaboration networks and developing new networks to support the sectors to grow at scale. The second theme is people and skills. And that is obviously about us trying to ensure that the sectors have the people with the right skills they need from a broad talent pool from across Northern Ireland. The third theme across the plans is innovation, which obviously refers to R&D, entrepreneurs, startups and scale-ups. And finally, the theme of trade and investment, which runs across each of the plans, and that's about how we use FDI in a more targeted way and export support to grow the sectors. So a significant amount of departmental activity and programmes are already actively supporting these sectors, as well as the broader economy, and that activity is set out within the action plans. Part of the purpose of the plans is to align activity across what we call the DFE family, including our ALBs, such that those interventions are coordinated and sequenced to have maximum impact. However, the action plans also seek to ensure that specific needs of our high potential sectors are addressed and met. And in that context, we have identified some new actions, and some of those, just by way of example, include the proposal for a learning factory to deliver skills for growth in the manufacturing sector. So the department is collaborating with delivery partners on a pilot proposal in the Midwest, in the Mid-Ulster and Southwest region at the moment. And that training and learning factory for school leavers will deliver the skills for growth of the industry in those regions and create a new learning pathway in the process. In the Agri-Tech plan, there is an action to expand capital grants to improve productivity for food and drink processors. And members will be aware that the Minister launched a new £46 million agri-food investment initiative in July. Then on the cyber and software action plan, we have a commitment in there to explore how we use or prioritise postgraduate funding in support of the sector as part of the review of the postgraduate award scheme. And you may also be aware that the department announced £2.5 million to support additional AI and data science postgrad qualifications at the time of the launch of the AI Collaboration Centre earlier in the year. So it's hoped that the totality of activity contained across the action plans will see us start to turn the dial in terms of economic growth across those sectors in a way consistent with the Minister's priorities. Success in that regard will see these sectors realising their potential, and in doing so, we believe will create more good high-skilled jobs. For example, in the technology sector, the typical salary is around 40% higher than the regional average. So increasing the availability of those types of jobs and also drawing more people into those types of jobs from other parts of the labour market is going to be a significant part of what we're trying to do. We believe success will also see improvements in terms of regional balance. The sectoral action plans cover high potential sectors which have significant geographical spread across Northern Ireland. As the local economic partnerships are established and start to shape their local priorities, these will reflect sub-regional strengths and opportunities. And we believe there is scope to closely align the next stage of this work, which is about developing cluster policy, closely with that sub-regional programme. And finally, while there's an economy-wide focus on lowering our carbon emissions and lessening our dependency on fossil fuels, the low-carbon net zero plan focuses on the scalable green technologies that we think provide unique opportunities to provide green solutions around the world. So, for example, one of the most obvious examples being Wrightbus and some of the green technology IP that and hardware it's selling across the world at the minute. So, Chair, that's just a brief overview of the approach we're taking to support our high potential sectors, with details on the specific actions contained within the plans themselves. As policymakers in the department, we speak to business and representative bodies a lot because we are trying to frame policy that works for them. But colleagues in InvestNI have a much more hands-on relationship with business and entrepreneurs on a day-to-day basis, and that's where Jeremy can share some of his more practical insights of what he and his team do in terms of sectors and technologies.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Chair, if it's okay, I'd like to just take a few moments to outline how InvestNI, what InvestNI's approach is to sectors. And within Invest Northern Ireland, there are three primary client-facing groups. So one is responsible for encouraging new, locally owned, export-focused startups, and this is managed mainly through our regional offices. The second is responsible for encouraging first-time externally owned inward investment into Northern Ireland, and this is delivered mainly through our international offices in conjunction with a team in Invest Northern Ireland, in Northern Ireland. And then once these new starts, whether they're locally owned or internationally owned, become significantly established in Northern Ireland, they transition to our sector teams. And the purpose is to give businesses the best service according to their needs. So for new starts, either locally or internationally owned, the issues they most commonly face tend to be according to their stage of development. So what we do is we group those businesses together, and they're serviced within Invest Northern Ireland by people with expertise in addressing those stage of development issues. Once they've become established, the businesses transition into our sector teams, where the common issues that the businesses face tend to be more on the basis of the sectors they are in rather than their stage of development. So, for example, skills supply, production techniques, market development, or relevant clusters that they may be trying to sell into. And although the sector teams are primarily based in headquarters, it's really important to note that the sector teams within Invest Northern Ireland manage portfolios right across the region. So once they go to Belfast for the sectors, they're still managing portfolios right across Northern. In fact, the majority of their work is probably outside of Belfast, and those staff can be based in the regional offices as well as headquarters. Just where is the client going to get the best service is what we want to try and achieve. At a high level, the sector teams that we have within Invest Northern Ireland are as follows, and there's very close alignment to the action plans that Alan has just laid out. So there's advanced manufacturing and engineering, including the green economy, and that accounts for about 40% of our client base, of the employment in our client base. Life and health sciences, which has about 10% of the employment in the client base. Food and drink, about 20% of the employment. And then technology, financial, business and professional services, which has about 30% of the employment. Now, within each of those sector divisions, we will manage that client base through a series of teams, and those teams are grouped together by subsectors within those main sectors. So, for example, within advanced manufacturing and engineering, there are teams that look after aerospace. There's a team that looks after materials handling. There's a team that looks after construction. So that we break it down into the subsectors. Within technology and services, there are teams that look after ICT and software development, and other teams that look after financial services, legal services, professional services. And within food and drink, there's dairy, there's meat and poultry, and bakery. And then within each of those teams, there will be a number of client executives, or effectively account managers, who will be the main point of contact for the business within Invest Northern Ireland. Portfolio sizes within each of those client executives can vary quite broadly from less than 10 to over 50. And that depends according to the nature of the businesses that they have in their portfolio. So Invest Northern Ireland is a complex organisation, and we're not asking the businesses to understand everything about Invest Northern Ireland. What we are asking the client executives to do, who do understand Invest NI, is to go out and understand the businesses, the issues that they face, the challenges that they have, the opportunities that are there, and then bring from Invest Northern Ireland, from the suite of products and solutions that we have, answers to their problems. So it's up to the client executive to understand the business, not the business to understand the complexities of Invest Northern Ireland. And our aim then is to help those businesses become more competitive so that they can win new business in international markets and grow and help the prosperity of Northern Ireland. And the solutions that those client executives will bring tend to be in the following areas: innovation and research and development, leadership and skills, trade and new markets, and financing for growth. We have a property team as well. And what we do is we promote what's called a client team approach, where the client executive or the account manager will bring in expertise from around the organisation according to the needs of that specific business that they are working with. So, for example, if a business wants to develop a new product, the client executive may bring in someone from our R&D team who has the expertise in that particular area to help them in finding a solution with that client. If the client wants to sell in Asia Pacific, then they will bring in someone from the trade team who has expertise or in-market knowledge of that area. So, just closing, in addition to working with the clients within the sectors, and the sector teams take that knowledge that they are building up from all of those businesses and have quite a valuable knowledge base of what is going on in those sectors in Northern Ireland. And then they will then take that knowledge and work with the sectoral and trade bodies across Northern Ireland. So, for example, in manufacturing, we've got Manufacturing NI, we've got the Makers Alliance, we've got ADS. In food, there's NIFTA. There's in life and health sciences, there's Harani. There's the Software Alliance for the software sector, and then there's other bodies like the Society of Chartered Accountants for financial services as well. We'll also work with stakeholders and universities in order to develop, invest in sector-specific strategies, in order to organise, sponsor or participate in sector-specific events or initiatives, to develop sector collaborations, and then obviously input into the sector DFE action plans as well, and work with the department and what they're doing. Just as a couple of examples in that area, so last week the Minister was away in Singapore with an all-island fintech trade mission. Last week we had a food and drink showcase with 105 Northern Ireland suppliers, over 100 buyers from around the world, so from locally, GB, and also internationally. We've also recently had a Sustainable Water Connect event from our Green Economy team in conjunction with Northern Ireland Water. 305 businesses, suppliers and stakeholders came to that to see how we could have sustainable water solutions. And then finally, we have last year we had the UK Space Conference, where there were 1,750 attendees at that, and that was organised by the teams within Invest Northern Ireland. I will leave it there, Chair.
Oh, thank you very much indeed, Jeremy, and thank you, Alan, for that. Alan, maybe just as a start, could you talk me through how the industry were involved in the production of these plans? There was an event yesterday here, which was probably particularly relevant to the creative industry in relation to one that Ofcom was holding, and I spoke to a number of people who are involved in this industry, and I had asked them for their views on the action plan, and they'd never heard of it.
Okay, Chair. So if I maybe go back to the start of this process, which we call the Technologies and Clusters Work Programme.
Yes.
So the first, we split that into 3 phases, which broadly split down into 3 years. So the first year of that was about the consultation. It was about understanding how do we define the sectors of highest potential, what do the technologies within those look like, and what are the USPs. We then put that out for consultation, and broadly speaking, respondents agreed that that looked about right and a good basis to move into phase 2. So phase 2 is effectively the development of the sector plans. Now, each one of those was led within the department at grade 7 level, head of branch level. They took forward their sort of own work programme. It was all then coordinated centrally, and I had a role in that respect. Each of those teams in developing those plans started from the baseline of the consultation. They then engaged with, these were co-designed, so Invest were heavily involved, representative bodies across all of these were engaged in one way or another, most of them quite heavily in the development of them, to make sure we understood what their sectoral needs were, where they saw the problems, the challenges. I would say I think it was the creative maybe you referred to, Chair, that one was developed by Screen NI, closely aligned to their strategic plan. So that's probably one of the 7 that we in the department were less heavily involved in, if I can put it that way, but certainly it was a co-design process, and the likes of Makers Alliance, Software NI, all of those bodies were involved in the development, for sure.
These are important pieces of work. My difficulty with them is, and you've used the word collaboration on a number of times, which is important, I don't see any connectivity or read across these plans fitting in with each other. So take the screen industries, for example. People just don't work in the screen industries. They're involved in software and development of how they produce their technologies. They're involved in advanced manufacturing to produce their sets. And I know that there'll clearly be people within the department who are leading in one sector and another. But I do think that there is a piece of work to bring all these together into one coherent strategy, because trying to define business and industry into one sector, that's just not the case anymore. The businesses, as they continue to expand and diversify, work across a range of sectors. And if we're simply saying to them that this is your sector and this is where you fit, then I think there needs to be some thought as to how we collaborate between all these, because these are the high growth markets. In relation to the screen industries sectoral action plan, I know you say you're not heavily involved, but reading through the document, you would have thought one of the first things you would include in that was the economic value of that industry to Northern Ireland at present. and there's no reference to that whatsoever. There's no references to the amount of jobs that supports. There's no reference in this to how we collaborate with our further and higher education sector to make sure that we have the skill force for the future. Turning to the advanced manufacturing materials and engineering, obviously the enhanced economic zone, which the department are going to lead on through UK Treasury, again isn't mentioned in that. If that's going to be a £150 million fund, would have thought that that's something that we might wish to consider, given some inclusion on whether members like or don't like it. Intertrade UK is now a UK-wide body. The UK internal market is still the biggest customer for any business here in Northern Ireland, and not a single reference to it in these documents. So really, really important work, but I just think that there's probably a bit more that the department can do to try to bring these together and recognise the strengths that we have. David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentations. I want to look at three kind of areas. One is looking back before we kind of look forward, and I appreciate the ambition of this, but can you tell me what programme has worked in the past?
In general, in terms of any specific sector, or
anything right across?
In terms of economic policy and well, I mean, Jeremy, you could probably talk about specific schemes, but things like the Collaborative Growth Programme, which did start to create some of those networks across industry that we're talking about. So we have an advanced manufacturing, we have a network that's come off the back of that intervention. We have something in maritime and offshore. That programme has now been replaced by the Cluster Acceleration Programme. I think that's a £16 million investment. So different schemes will have had different impacts, David, and Jeremy.
Give me one that's worked, that has worked really, really well in the past. That is the best. Say that if you're ranking them down of programmes that the department have done, give me the top three.
So I would say, in answer to that one, most of the programmes that Invest Northern Ireland will be cross-sectoral, but as I was explaining, then the client executive can tap in. So if you're in the manufacturing sector, you can go to say an example of the programme I was going to give is operational excellence. So operational excellence is mainly delivered to the manufacturing sector, and what we do is we have a number of staff who have a background in manufacturing and production, and they go in and advise our clients on how to be more lean. And the return that we have had on that particular programme is £17 to 1. It's the best programme that we have got. Okay. So it's a good example of, it's mainly in manufacturing because for the reasons I've just laid out, but we are keen to explore how we could take those lean lessons and apply them to the services sector as well.
Okay, so that programme, we'll take that programme as an example. Has that programme scaled?
Yes, we have increased it. Now, the challenge to scale it is because it's delivered by individuals. So, how many staff can you have that are delivering it, and what's the absorption rate for the clients to have it? But we have increased what we have done from the start.
So I get the ambition here. I totally get the ambition. I love the ambition. But every time I read through it, it's we're going to do what we've kind of done. So I'm trying to work out what is done that's worked, and why aren't we scaling that you're talking about business scaling. What's Invest doing to scale?
Well, if I can give a slightly different example. So the main three programmes that we would deliver most of our budget through will be selective financial assistance, which is for employment and for capital investment, through skills and through the grant for R&D. One of the challenges that we have faced recently is we're now nearing full employment, and productivity is a challenge for Northern Ireland. The selective financial assistance programme is dependent on the number of jobs that are being generated, so we want to put a greater emphasis more on productivity. So a new programme, so taking what we've done in the past, David, that has been successful in selective financial assistance, and saying how can we improve that? We have just launched the Agri-Food Investment Initiative, which means we're not constrained by that cost per job requirement, and we can put capital investment into businesses instead. So I think There are successes in the past that we can build on, but the future is different, and how do we then adjust and adapt to that future? And Agri-Food Investment Initiative is an example of that.
I just don't see the scale of what the programmes from the department nor Invest are doing to help the businesses. You're asking the business to scale, but the support that's there, we're not taking what the best of what is happening and scaling that. Right? If I look at the reverse of that, what programme hasn't worked?
Question. Let me come. There have been some. I'm not denying there haven't been. Just put on the spot to try and come up with one is a challenge. But
well, then the next question is: are they still there?
No, they're not.
They're gone.
No, and what we do is so before a programme is launched, we will do a business case to assess the need, to assess how much money we believe we're going to put into it. We will test that. We will then run the programme, we will then do an evaluation on it, and if it is not generating a return to the taxpayer, it will be stopped. It will. Now, sometimes programmes get stopped because there just isn't sufficient budget, and we say, okay, we've got to make cuts somewhere, and there can be different reasons for stopping different programmes.
Okay. The concern I have, and I say I reiterate again, is the ambition of this is I don't think you'll have anybody disagreeing with it. The bit is whenever you read it through, it says every time Invest will continue this or continue this. So I don't understand how you get a different result if you're not doing something different going in. So how you expect the business to get something different if Invest isn't doing something different?
So I think that's a very fair question, and I think the best example that I've got at the moment is saying, okay, we need to pivot more to productivity rather than jobs, and AFII is an example of that. And we would like to roll out and planning to roll out a wider SFA programme that's broader than just agri-food to say SFA can be used for wider investment without having a jobs constraint on it.
Last one on this, and I just want to look at energy slightly quickly, but I've experienced this as a client customer. You have to become a client customer of Invest to even get into any of these programs. Is that still the case, or is every business this open to every company that wants to get involved and grow their business?
It's a good question, and that came out of the Lions Review. So what we were being asked in the Lions Review was to be relevant to all of the businesses in Northern Ireland, and we are now endeavouring to do that. The challenge that we face, David, is that you have a limited resource, and if you're in any business, you will put your resources, you will focus your resources where you're going to get the greatest return. So the best analogy that I can use is that we would look at the businesses in Northern Ireland like a funnel, and we are trying to have as wide a mouth to that funnel as possible to capture as many businesses and offer a service to as many businesses as possible. So we will have a one-to-many solution in many instances for that. So for NI Business Info as an example, innovation and vouchers are examples of programmes. The New Energy Efficiency Capital Grant are programmes that are available to all businesses in Northern Ireland. However, when you look at where the wealth is being generated in Northern Ireland, there are some companies that are generating more. And if you have a business where you have got 80% of your revenues are coming from 20% of your customers, you will want to look after those 20% of those customers. So we have a range of ways that we will look at the businesses. And at the widest level, we'll have a one-to-many solution. And at the focused area where we want to make sure we're getting the greatest return from those who are actually generating the wealth, we will have a one-to-one service. In the middle, we will have a transactional service. So it's not a one-to-one, but it will be individual interventions. So the nozzle of that funnel is very fine, but the mouth is very broad. And that's one of the changes that's coming about through Lions. Where we will focus
the
our...
answer to David's question is some programmes are open to all businesses, but not all.
Yeah, that's correct. And Cher, just to be clear on that, the way that we differentiate is if we want to grow the economy in Northern Ireland, it's a small place, it's a small market, we need to focus where there are markets of scale and markets that are growing. So where the programmes that aren't open to everybody, what the differentiator is, are you looking at external markets? So if you're looking at markets outside of Northern Ireland, you can pretty well qualify for all of the support. But there's no point in us just focusing on businesses that have a focus on a Northern Ireland market.
I think I was just trying to get the answer for David's question.
That's fine. Sorry,
Energy,
thank
then
you.
you wanted to turn
Energy,
to?
just quickly about energy. The starting point, you talk about, this is probably the department, we talk about the 1 gigawatt of offshore wind there, just as an example of within that. That starts with mapping of the, has that been done?
I can't say, David, sorry. It's not my area. Energy is not, although we've kind of coordinated and produced these plans. I can't speak to the detail specifically on that. I can get you the answer for sure.
The starting point for that is to understand where it can go. The South's experience was the developer led didn't work, so it needs to be driven by the department. So if you can answer that, come back. That's perfect. The other bit about that is are there any discussions around the Crown Estate and the seabed where Scotland had that devolved and the revenue comes to the Scottish Assembly? Is there any discussions around that from the department for Northern Ireland?
Again, I would have to defer to energy colleagues, David, but can come back.
100%, no problem. Thank you, Chair.
David. Kate.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Alan and Jeremy. It's nice to see you. Really interesting. I've got a couple of questions. I suppose I'll start with the action plan. You mentioned that there has been co-design in the development of it. In terms of implementation, will that still be the case? You'll still work very closely with the sectors. So
co-design and co-delivery.
Okay. And in terms of the kind of obstacles to implementation, what would you characterise as being the biggest problem so far?
So these are only very recently published in terms of the summer just gone past, so the implementation phase is still quite early. Each of the sector plans will have their own unique challenges. I suspect a lot of those will be around skills. Some of them will be around funding opportunities and how to pitch into what the new UK government funding streams are, for example. Some of them will be very sector specific. At a more sort of macro level, in terms of broader economic development, it's the usual challenges around budget, the stuff you'd be well aware of. But specifically on the sector plans, it's going to be largely around skills, funding, opportunities, in that kind of space.
And bearing those in mind, are you satisfied with how it's progressed so far? Because I remember them being announced during the summer, and then there wasn't really much talk of it since. My office actually put in a pile of questions about them because we wanted to know more. So since publication, are you satisfied with the progress so far?
So the progress, so we're moving into year 3 of this, which is about cluster development. The department has established a new grade 5 led team which will be responsible for implementation of these sector plans and also for developing the cluster policy, which is a business plan commitment. Okay. So to say that's a new grade 5 lead area. That area now is responsible for taking those forward and wrapping in the cluster work.
And how much can you talk about that policy? Practically, I mean, how the clusters will work. Can you talk much about how they'll be organised? I know we know it will align to the kind of key priorities, but in terms of like what businesses will be put together, will they be from the same sector, or will it be ones who? Will it be on kind of specific need?
I mean, all this is in play, so it's still, the department is working through, and as I say, that new team is going to develop the cluster policy. We do have some programmes and deliver some programmes to support and incentivise cluster behaviour. So I suppose if we think about why do we want to incentivise clustering, because all the evidence suggests that it's really beneficial for businesses. Often in the same sector, sometimes cross-sector, they often face the same challenges, common problems, and if they can actually pull some resource to try and find ways around those, find solutions, or to break into new markets, that's really beneficial. Probably just from a government perspective, we want more of that, so that I suppose the market failure is that there's maybe not enough of that behaviour. So through the programmes that Invest colleagues deliver, we're trying to promote that. Having a distinct cluster policy, which we've never actually had before, would be a pretty strong signal that that's what we're about.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I just don't fully understand it, and kind of curious to know more about best practice internationally, even kind of what that looks like.
Yeah, and clustering is one of those things. Everyone kind of has a different idea of what it's about. At a very basic level, sometimes think about clustering as the likes of the advanced manufacturing, the screening and crushing activity in Mid-Ulster, and people think that's a cluster. It's a geographical concentration of businesses doing a similar thing, but actually clustering is much more about can those businesses collaborate? Yes, they're in competition obviously, but is there things they can do together to pull their resource and actually get an outcome that's greater than the sum of what any one of them could have achieved, whether that's into a new market, breaking down some market access barriers, for example, or pulling together to tackle skills issues potentially.
Just to add to that, so Kate, I think it's a really good question, and sometimes we've struggled with it even within Invest Northern Ireland. The way we've set up our sector teams is largely based on the function that they perform. So what are they actually doing? So are they making something, or are they doing software development or whatever? When we go into market, it might actually be then on what market are they serving. So say, for example, you might take Kainos as a software development company, so would be within our ICT team within Invest Northern Ireland, but they may participate in a health trade mission or something like that, because that's the end market that they are selling into. And then from a cluster point of view, as Alan has pointed out, there have been times where there is a particular geographical market where there is a customer in that market that has a range of challenges, and we have brought out companies from different sectors to address each of the challenges that one particular company faces. So there's a cluster of companies coming together with a common challenge of that company to help them. And so it's quite vague, but tailored is probably the best way to put it, actually. Yeah.
Okay. All really interesting, and I'm looking forward to hearing more, especially when that team is in full flow. The software and cyber action plan, there are quite a few actions that say they're commencing in 2024. Have they all commenced in 2024?
I believe most of them have, yes.
Okay, I can always write and get more information. And then one last thing. The skills just comes up in absolutely everything, and the Chamber have really been advocating for a workforce development agency, a bit like SkillsNet in the South. Is this something that you've had any kind of engagement or discussion on?
So on the software side, most of the issues, you're right, are skills related and access to the folks with those kind of qualifications. Obviously, the department published the Digital Skills Action Plan quite recently, which gets into that space. I mentioned the postgraduate review, which is also looking at how we can actually maybe start to prioritise some of those digital skills, and that increase that pipeline into the skills or into the labour market. The specifics of the one you mentioned, Kate. There is some work ongoing on the skills side of the department around that. I'm not close to it, but yes, there is activity. Yeah.
Is this something that Invest has an opinion on, the setting up of a workforce development agency?
So the way it's structured at the moment, Kate, is that we would see that the department offers the skills and training to the individuals, and Invest then will offer it to the businesses. So if a business comes forward with a training plan for its employees, then that is something that we would support. But if individuals are looking for training, so for example through the universities or the colleges, then that's at the department. However, we would work very closely together with the department on those issues to make sure that we are aligned. It is, I would say, probably the biggest issue that we face across most of the sectors, given that where we are on unemployment, and there's nearly full employment. There are a number of things that have been introduced that have worked well. Assured Skills has worked well. We have an Attract Back programme that we are seeking to enhance and get off the ground within Invest Northern Ireland, do more in that particular area and use Northern Irish connections to do that. But ultimately, it's much bigger than just individual programmes, and it is about all parts of government being joined up in that. So it's right across the board to make sure that those sectors also look attractive, so people go into them in the first instance, if we want to increase supply to meet that demand.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Jonathan?
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen. Jeremy, I enjoyed your walkthrough of Invest NI there at the start, particularly complex organisation for many businesses to navigate. I particularly like the comment to say it is for the executive client manager to understand the business rather than the business to understand the processes within Invest NI. So with that in mind, how important, you put a big emphasis on those executive clientele within Invest NI and Invest NI staff and their understanding of the systems and the businesses. How important then is their experience and collaboration, and indeed also that continuity among senior staff within Invest NI to carry through that organisational knowledge?
I think it's vital, Jonathan, and I think when you look at the staff that are in Invest Northern Ireland, there's a very high proportion of them are from the private sector and have a business background, which I think helps because they then understand the issues that the businesses face. Training for people when they come on board is very important as well. So I think you're absolutely right. That they are the face of Invest Northern Ireland to our client base. So their training and their capability is highly important. We developed an approach recently, Jonathan, where all of the staff in that area were trained up, and it was called basically to become a trusted business partner. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. We use the trust equation. So you break down the elements of trust. So reliability, credibility. There's another part of it that says intimacy, which is quite interesting, but basically it means, have you been through the wars together? And if you're through difficult challenges together, does this person have my back? So if someone's credible, if someone's reliable, if they have your back in difficulties, if you break down the elements of trust and our staff understand that, then they know what they need to do to get the trust of the clients.
Well, given that pivotal role with knowledge exchange, particularly among senior management, how concerning is it for Invest NI that 4 of its senior management team are either, with the exception of the CEO, are either retiring or moving on by January?
I think it's difficult for me to comment because I'm one of the people that is moving. I think that's a question more for the chief executive. It is something that has been highlighted and should be acknowledged on our risk register and needs to be addressed. In my knowledge and experience of Kieran so far as chief executive, he's someone who knows how economic development works, and I would have confidence in him.
It's concerning because Invest NI are very keen to place onto businesses the crucial need for succession planning, and yet here we have 4 members of the senior team who have that knowledge and experience, years of experience, moving on at the one time at yet a pivotal moment in Invest NI's new approach with regards to the lands review. I think that's something that we haven't really heard enough about, and it's something that would certainly cause concern, because if that knowledge exchange is so crucial for businesses understanding the process, it leaves for a point of
Jonathan, I think they're fair points. It's difficult for me to comment as I'm one of the individuals. Okay. Having said that, I know that I am not indispensable in that organisation. I know that there are a lot of really good people. Any manager, director in an organisation wants to make sure that they have as good a team around them, and I know the directors that I have in my team are second to none, and I trust them implicitly, and I'm delighted to be able to have the people that I have working in my team. So I know that I have a good team around me. I know that if I go, that team will still be there, and they will be very strong.
Okay, moving on to a point that actually David had mentioned, and I suppose probably the historic allegation is that Invest NI was only interested in certain show ponies, and outside of that, most businesses struggled to engage with the system. Now, I know largely Invest NI was colleagues within Invest NI are largely dealing with the hand that they were dealt in terms of their remit. But with the Lions Review and the new approach and the widening of the funnel as such, how confident are you that businesses that haven't been able to access the support will be able to? And particularly, we talk about, you mentioned within relation to the chair, that those that are looking for external export growth pretty much can apply to all of the programmes and avail of the support. But the crucial part for that is, and you mentioned it in one of the points, which is funding for growth. So most businesses that want to engage with Invest NI that have struggled in the past, accessing that funding to enable them to grow, to reach these export markets have been particularly difficult. So do you see the Lions Review and the new approach and the widening of the funnel as such to be able to capture these businesses? Are you hearing positive feedback?
So we have just had approved at the board last month our new approach to segmentation, which goes into a lot more detail than what I've highlighted at a very high level here. And the idea there is that we do widen the funnel, the more support is available, but at the same time focus where we're going to get the greatest return. And it is a little bit of a tightrope. You're trying to service a lot, but then focus at the same time. So there are new initiatives. The qualification criteria, Jonathan, to become an Invest NI client has been made more open with a view to here's where we want you to get to and how can we encourage you to get there. So rather than people see it as a closed door, it's an open door with us saying, welcome, how can we help you get there? That's the change of culture that we want to try and embed in the organisation. Having said that, they still will need to demonstrate an ambition to grow and an ambition to service markets outside of Northern Ireland, because there's no point in Invest Northern Ireland supporting a business that's going to create 20 jobs in Ballymena and all of it does is take 20 jobs away from Antrim. There's no net benefit for that. So if we look at markets that are growing, markets of scale outside of Northern Ireland, then the whole economy can grow. Having said that, the locally owned businesses, the locally focused businesses still potentially could export, and we want to encourage them to do that.
So what does funding for growth look like in terms of one of those stems within Invest NI, clients looking to be able to, new clients, new local clients that are looking to an export market but require funding to grow, one of the subsections, funding for growth. What does it look like?
So the ambition, the best example is to look at the detail of our ambition to grow programs that we are offering to encourage people to do that. And going back to David's question, from a scaling point of view, Ambition to Grow is a program that we are then saying is okay, that has been successful. How can we broaden it? So how can we take it even one step back to the companies that are, and these discussions are just happening at the moment, so we haven't launched the program yet, but we're looking at where can we do that. So how can we take those businesses that are locally focused and plant that seed in their minds, say how can you become focused on external markets and do something. So we're taking that Ambition to Grow program that's there, that has been successful, and saying how can we move that one step back in the chain.
Does funding for growth include partnering with other financial institutions to enable access to a larger scale funding to enable some of these businesses to scale rapidly to reach the export markets?
Yes, it does. So we have a access to finance suite of programs, and included within that, so they are funded by Invest Northern Ireland. So these are funds that were given to external delivery organisations to manage on our behalf. If I take TechStart, for example, is looking at startups in the tech sector. Not only do they take our funding, but they then try and bring other funding in from around and outside of Northern Ireland to fund those types of projects as well. So I think is that the answer to the question?
That's it, yeah. And finally, for me, Chair, and thank you. Business conferencing has been something that there has been huge success around, particularly in Northern Ireland. It's been really encouraging to see that ecosystem that's developed, and there's huge potential. The Space Conference is something that I did attend, and it was an exciting forum, particularly given where things are today. How do we rate success of a conference like that? What has been the follow-up? What has been the benefit to local business? Have we any feedback?
Yeah, so all of the feedback that we had, Jonathan, for that particular conference was hugely positive. there are different measures of success, and some can be more output based rather than outcome based. So, for example, how many people did we get from outside of Northern Ireland to come and visit for the first time and they've never been before? How many were in our target sectors, and how many meetings did we get with companies that we had never met before? So those types of metrics were positive. When you go to the outcome measure, so did that ultimately result in some of those businesses coming to Northern Ireland and setting up? That's a much longer gestation period, and it's probably too soon to say in some of those areas.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Gary?
Thanks, Chair. A couple of questions for me. When Diane Dodds, the then Minister for the Economy, launched the 10X economy strategy document, one of the strengths that I seen in that document was the endorsements that it had from various leaders of various sectors. And obviously they all gave their endorsements to that document. Obviously, since Minister Murphy came on board, and obviously he announced his economic vision, there didn't appear, certainly from what I can see, to be the same level of endorsement for that. Could you maybe outline in terms of the endorsements that you have for these sectoral plans from the various sectors, obviously that are impacted?
Okay, Gary, so I suppose I would say that this programme of work started under 10X in 2023. The Minister then came in, obviously, February time and set out his agenda. Now, what the Minister set out didn't materially change. What we were doing here on sectors, technologies and USPs, we'd been to consultation on that under the 10X banner. With the Minister coming in, we immediately then took his advice, like, we've consulted on this, do you feel this is still an appropriate way forward? And he agreed. So, like, the sectoral work, the technologies focus, started under 10X, continues under this Minister without significant material change. So, in terms of endorsements, so as I said, these have been co-designed, Gary, so I'm trying to think if any weren't, and Chair mentioned possibly in the creative side, but to my knowledge, most industry bodies were consulted and engaged fully in the development of the plans, fed in a lot of useful intelligence and insights. So, in a sense, they are endorsed in that respect, even if there is or isn't sort of a nice quotation mark somewhere associated to them. But as I say, they have been fully engaged in the development.
Okay, thanks for that. No, I do take your point. I just think it is vital, and as the Chair has said, that those sectors who are impacted, I think it is important that they are very much front and centre in terms of any strategy development or any policies that the Minister takes forward, because ultimately it will not be the Minister who will deliver it. With respect, it'll be those industries who are on the front line doing the job. I suppose another question for me, and I do share the Chair's view as well in terms of each of the action plans and possibly the lack of joined upness across them. But one of the themes that does actually consistently appear is theme 2 around people and skills. That is an area which obviously we're particularly interested in, whether it be the software and cyber, the fintech or agri-tech. There's all talk of widening participation. Now, some of those themes talk about widening participation within the existing structures that the department already have. So can you talk through how then you're going to widen participation, tackle inclusion, whether that be women, people with disabilities, people from more deprived areas? How can you do that within the existing structures? And it talks about commencing obviously in 2024. So, obviously we're at the end of that now. So can you maybe just talk through then some of the work that is being done?
Okay, Gary. So, as I said in the opening statement, part of what we were trying to do here was brigade everything within the department and across its ALB, so as everything's pointing in the same direction. So we kind of we get around these sectors and get all our ducks in a row, so to speak, across the different parts of the department, across skills, across energy, so that the focus is these sectoral development plans. So as you say, there are common themes across them, and that is us trying to recognise that those themes run across the department and its ALB. So we're trying to make them cohesive and around common delivery goals. So the widening participation piece, there'll be programmes and activities within existing structures. I can't speak specifically to what exactly is going on there. Colleagues and skills would be able to provide updates on that, but just because the structures haven't changed as such, the activity that happens underneath those structures can still be fluid, and as Jeremy said, some things work, some things don't work. We pull the things that don't work and focus on the things that do. Sorry, that's probably a bit general, but
no, look, thanks for that. Obviously, I would appreciate an update if we can in relation to that. Does the skills for a 10x economy strategy then, does it still apply? Do you see that as still a relevant piece of work? Obviously, a huge amount of work was done in pulling that document together as well. Is that still relevant at this minute in time?
So, again, sorry, outside of my area, but I know the Minister did make a statement on skills early in summer, July time, I think, which sort of set out his priorities. As to the actual status of the 10x skills document, I couldn't say for certain, Gary. Colleagues and skills would have to advise.
No, thanks for that. I suppose just a final comment. I think with all of these strategies and documents, what we need to be careful, and certainly from what I see, is that there are, in my opinion, almost competing visions, and obviously it's cross-departmental, and clearly within the economy department, there's a number of different individuals who are looking after the different sectors. I just think for anything to be done, we really need to see a joined-up collaborative effort to achieve what needs to be achieved. But no, I appreciate your update today. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Diana.
Chair, thank you. And it just really follows on from what Gary was saying, the piece about skills. And, I notice in AMME it says the report estimates that the sector is expected to require at least 1,500 jobs a year. And many of these are highly technical, skilled jobs. And we have to look at the pipeline coming through and what's available through skills and training. And how do you see the department addressing that? I know it's cross-departmental. How do you see them addressing that skills, the need for those particular skills in order for the sectors to be successful? Likewise, city and growth deals focus on automation, robotics, clean tech. I'm from Fermanagh, South Tyrone, so I'm aware of the skills factory, and be watching that very closely. But skills, I'm particularly attracting women into manufacturing in that. And the second question really is, what are you doing to attract skilled labour back to Northern Ireland, specialist skilled labour, the Indigenous population who we may have lost, or who hopefully could come back? Thank you.
Okay.
Pick up and I'll come in after.
Yeah, so the first point there, just about the skills pipeline, and again, it's probably for skills colleagues to comment, but rather than keep saying that, I can give you sort of my perspective so I cover trade and investment. So part of what we're thinking about there is inward investment, so foreign direct investment. Many of the US companies that come across to Northern Ireland, and sometimes that creates pressures in the labour market in terms of technology skills, software skills, because a lot of the FDI we bring in are hugely successful at is in that area. It's in software, it's in cyber, it's in AI and data analytics. So one of the more innovative things we're trying to work with those companies and invest in particular is what can those companies do to help with the skills challenge in the pipeline? Can they develop with us programs, pathways for young people to come in from maybe underprivileged areas to get access to those? I mentioned earlier that technology jobs pay 40% higher. So, can we get people into that stream, maybe from alternative pathways, who maybe haven't gone through the traditional university further education vehicle? So, that's just one of the ways we're thinking about how do we try and address some of those skills challenges. Obviously, the skills side of the department is doing much more thinking about that, but I'm just giving you a sense of something that I'm more directly involved in, that we are thinking about those things, and a lot of those FDI companies are very keen actually to become embedded, to provide some of the solutions, not just create some of the tensions and challenges in the labour market, and particularly around females, underrepresented groups and so on. So it's very positive.
I think, Diana, we've got to be realistic about it, in the sense that there is no silver bullet. There's no one thing. Demand exceeds supply at the moment. So on the supply side, how do we make some of those sectors more attractive for people to go in? And I think that's a role for everybody to play, for government and for the businesses themselves to work together, which is where some of this work is important as well. There's what we can do in the short term. So things like the assured skills are good. And then there's what we can do in the longer term. So, for example, have the universities got the right funding to provide the right level of people for courses? You asked also about Attract Back. So we do have an Attract Back programme. And the idea there is that we will take those opportunities that are in the client base and try and make people outside Northern Ireland aware of it through channels like Northern Irish Connections. So we're not becoming a jobs agency, a jobs, an employment, what's the word I'm looking for? Recruitment agency. We're not becoming a recruitment agency, but we are trying to flag up where those opportunities are, so people can see, well, actually, there are things happening in Northern Ireland that are really positive that might make them want to come back.
Yeah, no problem at all. Philip?
Thank you. Alan, when you were doing the introduction, obviously these strategies are set against the other priorities of the Minister: regional balance, net zero, productivity, good jobs, etc. So, you talked about the jobs within the technology sector, 40%. And David mentioned ambition. So, in terms of ambition, how ambitious are we with regard to additional jobs at that level within this strategy?
So we haven't gone right down to that level, Philip. We haven't sort of made predictions around size of sectors in terms of jobs growth. Now, when we were looking at defining the sectors and we were trying to identify the high potential, part of that assessment was looking at growth potential in terms of employment, also outward trade opportunities, and so on. So it fed into that kind of assessment and identification of the sectors. What we haven't done is set sort of hard employment targets or jobs growth targets around those. The Minister's very focused on quality of employment, as opposed to sort of setting hard targets at this point.
Okay. And then obviously, slightly tangential to that, it's clear from David that there's a number of offshore wind development doing political engagement. So some of the issues David raised, I could easily have raised. They're obviously meeting with us all. But in terms of the net zero carbon reduction segment, you talked about bus and hydrogen. Some of my own constituency, it's an excellent example. But it would be useful to know what other particular technologies offer the best opportunity for short, medium, long-term growth with regard to employment and good jobs, but also in terms of reduction of carbon and helping us move towards net zero.
So I think within the plan, Philip, it sort of identifies the technologies. So what came through the consultation, basically, that stakeholders, academics, industry identified as sort of the 4 or 5 key bits of net zero green technology that they feel provide the biggest opportunities. So those are in the plan. I suppose the other thing I would say about these plans is that in a sense they're not set in stone either. They're technology based. You'll appreciate technology changes rapidly, how it's supplied, how it's developed. If you think, Chair mentioned creative and screen, probably 10 to 15 years ago, if we were doing this work, probably wouldn't have included screen or creative to the same extent, because it's become so big so quick. So there will be other opportunities, other niche areas will emerge that we'll also need to be able to adapt to, and rather than rigidly stick to these 7 publications, if that makes sense. So
I mean, you talked about the growth in screen. I mean, we expect and hope for a similar or even better expansion of green technology. How, in terms of that expansion, how will you ensure that the regional balance criteria is applied?
So I think green technology, net zero, is one of those areas that has actually a really good sub-regional spread. So there's things going on all over the place in terms of green tech and interest in green opportunities. So I suppose almost by default you have a really good starting position. So if Invest can then come in with some of that support around innovation skills and export and getting those entrepreneurs, green is it's a massive challenge obviously, but it's also a massive global opportunity in terms of commercially and some of the things we're doing here, which Richard Rogers or someone on the energy side of the department could speak much more convincingly about, but they are there. And Jeremy,
I think just to come in on that one, Philip, so for example, when you get back to this discussion about sectors and clusters, the green economy, we've established a team in Invest Northern Ireland to look at the opportunities that there are for businesses in Northern Ireland to be selling into the green economy, and where are those opportunities. So this is just a very high level. So renewable energy, low carbon retrofit, so that's energy efficiency, low carbon mobility, sustainable water management, carbon services, green fuels. And what we find is that in that green economy, the opportunities are right across all of the sectors. So you could have software firms that have opportunities here. You could have construction firms that have opportunities here. So that green economy development team, even though it's defined as a sector team, is actually working cross-cutting with all of the other sectors that are there. A lot of them are in manufacturing. So, and most of that manufacturing is outside of the Belfast. So you get that good spread of region. And even materials handling, as an example, usually for quarries and mining, but now being used for recycling industries as well. So, and if you look at Mid-Ulster, that is such a strong powerhouse for materials handling.
Grand job, thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Sinead? We're just waiting on broadcasting on your microphone. Oh, there you go.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jeremy and Alan, for answering the question so far. The funding position for the Enhanced Investment Zone, I believe, has been confirmed. How will this impact the action plans? I'm particularly thinking about the advanced manufacturing.
Yes, that's my understanding, Sinead. The funding was confirmed at or around budget time a couple of weeks ago. There had been a period of, effectively, there was a pause, you're probably aware, for a number of months from the election being called back in July or June. So yeah, it seems that's full steam ahead. that will play into will play across these plans, specifically the advanced manufacturing and the net zero. The Minister's already outlined his preference to use this in the net zero green technology space. So I think Chair mentioned it's not mentioned within the advanced manufacturing. That maybe was because there was uncertainty around it during the development of these. But look, it will certainly play into how these are delivered, and the investment zone is essentially a separate piece of work, but industry is heavily involved in that, even at the early stage of trying to sketch out what a proposal looks like, working with Whitehall.
I think
so it will be like a co-design aspect of it?
That will totally be a co-design process, yeah.
I think, Sinead, and just to add to what Alan said, it is at very early stages, so it is an opportunity for all of us to feed in to say, how do we make best use of this? Because it's not all cast in stone at the moment of what it's going to look like. No. And if people have strong views on this is the way that this should be delivered, then now is the time to be saying it.
It's my understanding that the Minister is actually meeting in Westminster at the minute, I think today, in relation to this, but it would be really important that we, they're talking about prioritising the green economy in and around that, but it's really important that we actually can achieve a bit of regional balance with this particular funding. The other aspect, just my favourite topic of regional balance, again, in some of these areas, some of these action plans, and around the software and cyber, it actually says that it's reviewing sub-regional economic priorities, but we know that 95% of the roles are based in Belfast. How can we achieve some regional balance in some of these sectors? And the other one that I'm concerned about again as well is Northern Ireland Screens. They're talking about their delivery partners, and the delivery partners are Belfast Harbour Commission, Titanic Studios, Loop Studios, Silverwood Studios. Those are all based, the delivery partners are all based in Belfast. How are we going to actually achieve regional balance within some of these sectors when they're so heavily based in one part of Northern Ireland?
So I said it earlier, Sinead, I think there's actually a pretty good spread, a pretty good sub-regional spread. If you look at these sectors in terms of employment, where activities are based, the spread is actually quite good, and we have a separate document. I don't have it with me today, but it is available on the department's website, which looks at the evidence and analysis we did around identifying these sectors. So that includes regional profile, sub-regional profile of employment and activity. So that gives us a fairly good sense of where things are happening, and it is worth a look. The broader question of sub-regional, I mean, I think it will be important, and obviously we have the sub-regional economic plan. Again, I can speak sort of more to my side, which is FDI and trade, and what we're doing there is absolutely linking in what we plan to do with FDI. So the stuff that InvestNI will showcase will be completely linked up to what the local economic partnerships are developing in terms of their value propositions, and those value propositions will cut across their industrial capabilities, their research, their skills offer, the local education, university provision, and FDI will be lined up with that very sort of sub-regional perspective. So that's just one sort of from my perspective.
That's interesting, Alan, because the FDI have been looking at that, and have been looking at the work in relation to visits. For example, the last year, 2023, 2024, there was 52 FDI visits to Northern Ireland, to Belfast, and 6 to Derry. That doesn't sound like balance to me. I don't think there was any for Fermanagh at all.
Sinead,
So
maybe I could come in if that's okay.
There.
Yeah, no, so it's okay if I come in on that. There's two ways to I think answer the question. So one is when we're looking at the software sector, one of the results of COVID was the increase of number of people working from home or hybrid working. And what we have found interesting, and we need to do more work on this, is when you have a company, even if it's based in Belfast, where are the employees actually working? And what are they doing? And where are they spending their money? And we have done it for a number of companies, Sinead, already, and the spread of some of the employees on Belfast-based software firms is encouraging from a regional balance point of view. So they're right across Northern Ireland. We've got some postcode data on that. I think more work needs to be done on that, just to demonstrate the benefit of that for the regional balance. I think also, and I say this having done the inward investment job, Northern Ireland is a small place, and it is, whenever we bring visits to Northern Ireland, sometimes we will have them for 1 day or 1.5 days or 2 days, whatever it is. And we will determine the visits according to what they want to see. So if they want to meet with the universities, and fundamentally what they are looking to do is satisfy themselves that they will be able to find the skills. And they will tend to go to the greater areas of population. And that's just the reality of it. And that's what we need to satisfy ourselves on, or help satisfy them on, is that if they're going to invest in Northern Ireland, where are they going to get the skills from, and where do they want to go in those visit programmes? We will do our very best to encourage them to go to other locations around Northern Ireland, but sometimes we're just constrained by time as well.
I do appreciate all of that, but Jeremy, that's kind of the old Invest NI that you're talking about. You know, the investor, it's all investor led. What we want to do is that Invest NI are participating and directing as well, because other than that, we will have a concentration of investors in one area, and it is not serving Northern Ireland economy well, and that's well rehearsed now, I think well recognised, and we need to kind of do better. So I'm hoping to see an actual improvement. You know, we're an hour and a half down the road in terms of dairy, so when they do land, it's not outrageous to think that they can actually do a visit to the northwest as well. So
sorry for interrupting, but just to reaffirm, we are trying to do that.
Jeremy, no, we're going to keep going here because there's no question there. Sinead, do you have any other questions before we move on to Patrick?
Right. Sorry. Just some of the actions here. We have commencement dates, but we don't have any end dates in some of the action plans, or most of the action plans. Have you any? Is there any markers that we can look at to see progress within the context of the action plans as well?
Okay, so the action plans cover activity over a 3-year period, Sinead, so essentially the rest of this mandate. In terms of progress updates, we will be happy to provide updates across the range of those actions. As I said, the department is putting some firepower behind driving those forward and doing the cluster policy, so progress updates can be provided.
Okay,
no
thank
issue.
you very much.
Patrick?
Thanks, Chair. Just checking you can hear me.
Loud and clear, sir.
Thank you. So, look, I suppose, as always, when you come on at this stage of questions, a lot of the areas have already been touched on. I have to say I was really concerned by the last answer there in terms of regional balance, and I totally agree with Sinead's point on that. You know, one of the things that has been touched on very clearly here today is around clusters. It's around manufacturing, it's around skills and engagement, and regional balance as a key part of that. So when there's a clear directive from the department around regional balance, I have to say that I am concerned by that last response. I'm thinking even of GEMX, for example, a group or cluster in Derry, who work with manufacturing. So when you look at the manufacturing sector, it's not the same in all parts of the north. It's very different. So I would like to know, and it's a point that has been brought up earlier, around the engagement that has been done with existing groups. So that's my first point. My second point is to build on the point that Johnny raised earlier around the Invest offices. So there's obviously a plan to, I suppose, open and develop better regional offices and equip them with staff. So the point around experience, to me, and that is key. Because if we're developing and opening these offices, then the experience is vital to that. So it's to get a better understanding of who's going to be in those offices. Is it existing staff? Is it relocation of staff? Is it going to be new staff? Where's that experience and that balance coming from? Because there's clearly a wealth of experience within Invest. But when these offices are opening, I want an assurance that they're going to be opening with the best people. They're going to be opening with people who know the clients, who can work with them, who have those established relationships, but have the experience to develop new relationships as well.
Yep. So Park, when I'm just going back to the point which Sinead was making as well. We are committed to ensuring that there is better regional balance and to try and encourage more visits to go outside of Belfast when they come in as well. That is a given, and I just want to assure you that is where we are. I want the reason I said what I said was to balance it with reality as well. But there is still, I don't want to be perceived that this is the old Invest Northern Ireland and we just accept what the clients say. We only want to go there. We will be encouraging them, and we are encouraging them to go to other areas as well. So I assure you that is happening already from our international team. With regard to the regional offices, there is an undertaking to increase the resource in the regional offices. The regional strategy has just been approved by our board, so we haven't actually recruited or advertised for those posts yet, and that will be done in due course to increase the resource in the regional offices. There will be a concerted effort to make sure there is more joined up activity between the sector teams and the regional teams. Because that's something that we can improve on. There's no doubt about that. And with regard to your point about how do we make sure that they are the best people that are in those offices, we want the whole of the organisation. We want Invest Northern Ireland to be the best possible economic development agency there is in the world. And that means your staff have got to be the best. And I want to assure the committee that within Invest Northern Ireland there is a team of professional people who are there, who are proud of what they do and want to be the best. There is ambition there. And therefore, if we are going to recruit new staff or move staff in, we will want them to be the best wherever they are.
Okay. I have to say I'm still quite concerned by that. I mean, Invest's reality and the reality for businesses on the ground is clearly there sounds like there might be a divergence there. I didn't think there was, but the reality is that when businesses from FDI and from other investors are being brought to the north, there is an expectation so that they will be encouraged to do that. You know, mentioning things like that there's not enough time and stuff like that. That to me that does not match up with ministerial direction or with the general direction of Invest. But I mean, I do think that just there needs to be further clarity on that point, because if further visits are going to happen, I would like to see, you know, a clear direction and clear intent as to how there is going to be better regional balance and how that is going to be matched. Because if these companies are coming, it's exactly the point that Sinead said. I mean, I totally agree with it. You know, there needs to be more of an emphasis from Invest as well to say, look, this is opportunity for these companies to develop in other areas as well.
To answer that point, Park, so there are targets that are in the strategy for the first time that look at regional balance. So we will be held to account to do what the Minister has asked us to do, and we are committed to doing it.
Okay, Jonathan, you want to question?
No, thanks, Chair. Look, on the point of regional balance, I'm not against regional balance. I've always been in favour of placing businesses where we can have a skilled workforce to meet their needs. And that's not just, we always get into a battle here between the Northwest and Belfast, and I think anybody that falls in between is totally lost to this argument every time, because there is such potential right across Northern Ireland for different sector specifics. But I also think there's the attitude that when foreign direct investment visits come into Northern Ireland, that it's a jolly, they're here for a week. Quite often a lot of these businesses are in and out in a day. You know, have you any evidence to show that? Because I think sometimes it can be lost and people say, oh, we didn't have time to visit X, Y or Z. My knowledge of foreign direct investment visits to Northern Ireland, it's targeted, time specific. These people do not have a long time. They've already largely done a lot of research about what they're looking for. Am I right on that? Or
You're 100% correct, Jonathan. Very often what happens is that investors are looking at a number of locations, and they'll have 24, 48 hours in one or two areas, in a number of areas across Europe that they are looking at, and that's what we're trying to deal with, and we're trying to give them what they want. Yeah. You know, you give the customer what they want rather than saying, so that they are satisfied and that they will come back and maybe do longer visits in the future. I think what we also need to be clear about is that the regional balance just doesn't come from FDI. It comes from all of the activity that we're doing across. Absolutely. It's the new local starts. It's the growth of the businesses that are already here. And we have had a number of successes. The FDIs have come to Belfast, but then set up a second operation in the Northwest, for example.
Yeah, because quite often politically, members judge regional balance off a league table of visits from FDI. I think that's totally wrong. And it's actually disingenuous to the work that goes on right across InvestNI and supporting local businesses. It's just a point I think sometimes it needs to be put on record for members that are outside that region. In relation to the agri-tax sectoral plan, and this is, I suppose, broad, but how often are they reviewed? So obviously we're given the Chancellor's statement last week. There's huge pressure now on agriculture. And, you know, I look at particularly some of within the strategy, it talks about the challenges facing particular sectors. So we already know that the Chancellor's budget's, particularly on its issues within agriculture and inheritance tax, is going to damage competition, it's going to damage skills, sustainability, capital support. You know, does an action like that completely edit and change how InvestNI and how the department deal with the specific sector? Because looking at the ecosystem, you know, some of these companies that are involved in agriculture in Northern Ireland in the ecosystem are some of the leading companies in terms of output and in terms of productivity in Northern Ireland, which is really, really concerning.
Yeah, so firstly on that, Jonathan, as I said, these aren't set in stone. They've been published and they're sort of point in time. They've done a degree of looking forward to what opportunities would be, but they won't necessarily pick up emerging opportunities, just like they won't necessarily pick up a budget or next year's budget, and those are sort of real-time live issues that those sectors will have to grapple with. And you know, this is an ongoing process. We've published these, but we're continuing to work with, Invest, with the other delivery partners to actually deliver them, and those will be the live issues we'll have to contend with. Yeah. If I can just go back to the point in FDI, if there's time, Chair, okay. I think what that really emphasises is sometimes, it's about an investor coming to Northern Ireland. You get them through the door, yeah. But then what we have to really get good at is how we articulate our sub-regional expertise and capabilities, and that's what we're trying to do through the local economic partnerships. They will be able to really pull everyone together at that sub-regional council level and articulate this stuff, and then we, Invest can say to the investor who we've got through the front door, this area offers expertise here, opportunities here, and hopefully then that's how we get them to go to Fermanagh or go to.
Okay. I think it's always important to remember the key job of InvestNI, number one job, is to get that investor to come and to set up in Northern Ireland, full stop. We can get into then the argument of, do they go to Fermanagh, do they go to North Belfast, where do they go? But if they're not coming to Northern Ireland and don't want to set up in Northern Ireland, then these arguments are pointless. So Just one final question for me. Alan, are you
Sure.
responsible then for
Sure.
Sinead? I'll come back to you in 1 wee sec.
Okay.
I'm just conscious that we've had guests waiting on another one, so I'll come back to this issue and any other business. Alan, are you responsible for then the oversight and delivery of all of these plans?
A new Grade 5 led team will be, which has just been established.
Okay.
There's been a slight restructure within the group, so.
So there's no one. Are you currently ahead of it?
No, as of Monday, someone else is.
Who's currently head of it?
It's Grade 5 called Keith Forster.
Why aren't they here?
Because I kind of have the legacy knowledge of how we got to this point. Keith will be taking it forward from this point.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. Thank you. Jeremy, hopefully we maybe see you before you go to pastures new, but for all your years of dedication to the Northern Ireland economy, and I know you still have an important role to play, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, I'm going to come back to sum up actions on this at the end, and then I'm also going to bring Sinead and anyone else back in at the end who just want to raise any other issues. And I'm just conscious that we'll have some people from Disability Action who be meeting in 20 minutes. I don't want to curtail any debate or discussion in this committee, but I just don't want to be disingenuous or discourteous to our other guests who are waiting on us. So on that we will move to item 7, which is Disability Action, Employment Tribunals and Persons with Disability. Advise members now that we will receive an oral and written briefing in respect of the experiences of persons with disabilities at employment tribunals, and refer to members to the paper from Disability Action at page 167, a paper from a litigant in person reference group at page 183, previous DFE correspondence responding to Disability Action commentary on employment tribunals at page 203, other reports on personal litigants and employment tribunals from page 216 to 377, and previous correspondence at page 251. Can I, at this stage, say I'm very pleased to welcome our guests to committee, and firstly apologies for keeping you waiting outside. It's my fault as not executing my gavel quicker to keep people from asking questions. But you're all very welcome. Nuala Toman, but Nuala will be known to many colleagues for her great work in relation to disability action, and I should declare that I've met Nuala previously in relation to this issue. Les Amflil, who will be known to many people, he's a man who's had many hats over the years and continues to have. So Les, thank you for that. And Catherine, we're delighted to have you here, and can I just say on behalf of the committee, it's very brave of you to come along to this setting, but you're articulating the views that are experienced by many, and hopefully that you're giving a voice to many people out there who haven't been able to step forward. So thank you very much indeed for coming along on that. With that introduction, can I hand over to our guests if they want to make an introductory statement or if they want to make any comments at this stage.
Thank you. I'm just going to start off, and then I will be followed by Les and then Catherine. So just going to briefly set the scene and give some context. So I'm Nuala and I'm Head of Innovation and Impact at Disability Action, and to say from the outset, we receive no funding to provide services to litigants in person. It falls completely outside of our remit as an organisation, and in recent years we have had our information and advice services cut, and our capacity to deliver services to disabled people across the region has been significantly reduced. Why we are in the position of engaging with disabled personal litigants is as a direct result is when I took up my former post at Disability Action, we took a decision that we did not want to leave disabled people outside of service provision, and as a result, we began by receiving a small number of queries from litigants in person, and by engaging with one or two, that ended up in an avalanche of people who are falling outside of provision, and that's for a number of reasons. The services that do exist to support litigants in person are under-resourced and underfunded. For example, the majority of cases which are raised with the Equality Commission's helpline are disability discrimination cases, which shows you the extent of the issues and the number of people that are impacted
by disability discrimination in the workplace, and the Equality Commission unfortunately have to apply a framework to identify who they can represent, and are not in a position to represent everyone who comes forward with a request for support. And then the other service, which would be the Law Centre, does not have enough resources to address everyone's requirements either. And outside of that, then people are left, scrabbling around trying to identify legal representation, and often law firms don't pick up these particular cases. And what you have is a large body of people who are falling through the gaps. And taking that into account, our experience as an organisation, when we engage with people, they have been stuck in a referral circle, contacting organisation after organisation after organisation with nowhere to go, and they have often experienced a very traumatic experience within their workplace. There's a lack of early intervention within employment settings. There are a number of funded employment support services for disabled people, and there's no dedicated funded employment advocacy service that would provide early intervention and maybe seek a resolution before these cases enter into the tribunal system. Once personal litigants are within the system, they then face barriers in terms of the nature of the papers that they're presented with, the incredibly formal nature of the process, the sheer amount of information, and the very extreme power imbalance between trying to articulate their case when the respondent is often very heavily supported by legal backing. There's also a significant challenge in that if a personal litigant has a complaint to make or a challenge, it isn't clear where they go for assistance. While the employment tribunal sits within DFE, there's no site within DFE where a complaint can be addressed. These people are then not eligible to process through NIPSO, and there are challenges in terms of even accessing, what role the Lady Chief Justice has because of the distinctions between employment and justice. It's one of those kind of circumstances that we see time and again, where when there are two departments involved, sometimes things fall between two stools, and the majority of people that we've been engaging with have experienced suicidal ideation at some point within the process without access to services. I'm going to hand over to Les to pick up some of the procedural aspects.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Nuala. It's a fundamental right of a person with a disability to enjoy a fair hearing and to have been able to participate effectively in an industrial tribunal hearing. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of the Court of Appeal in Gallo versus Bombardier. Representing yourself at a court or a tribunal is a formidable challenge, and unfortunately we have procedures and arrangements that make that more difficult rather than easier. Tribunals are supposed to be more informal and more user-friendly than the courts. Unfortunately, there are two realities that undermine that. The first is that the areas of law covered by tribunals are among the most complex of all, and that certainly applies to many aspects of employment law. And then second, particularly with industrial tribunals, the procedures are as formal as court procedures in terms of preparing documents in advance, preliminary hearings and arrangements, and then the giving of evidence, which includes cross-examination and rules of evidence that are similar to those you'd find in courts. Nuala has outlined there are very limited services for free legal advice and assistance, so the reality is that most claimants have to manage the process on their own in a situation where the stakes are high. We do not know the extent of unrepresented claimants because the Office of Industrial Tribunals and Fair Employment Tribunals has not produced an annual report since 2012-2013. Then 2/3 of applicants went to court without representation, or went to tribunals rather without representation, and I don't think that has changed markedly since then. I used to be the director of the Law Centre. A long time ago, we ran a project which was designed to train up lay advisors to do industrial tribunals. Lay advisors at both independent advice centres and elsewhere do a lot of social security appeals. We could never get them beyond the door of the court. We could train them up to do employment law, to negotiate through the LRA very usefully. But when it came to actually doing representation, that's when lay advisors balked. Because unlike a social security appeal, on the other side of you would probably find a barrister, and you were dealing with cross-examination. So the procedures were very different from social security appeals, and that always created an insurmountable difficulty. The only Northern Irish research we have into the experience of personal litigants was produced jointly by the UU School of Law and the Human Rights Commission in 2018. At that time, there were around 5,000 personal litigants in courts, mainly in family court and bankruptcy proceedings, so about 5% of all litigants. What that research did was it observed the cases of around 179 personal litigants. It interviewed those individuals, plus 59 other court actors, so lawyers, judges and officials. And it also offered procedural advice on behalf of one part of the group to see if that made any difference. And what the research found was that personal litigants were unable to participate effectively in their claims because the court norms were built on the premise that all parties were represented, and personal litigants had to adapt to the courts, yet personal litigants were not given the tools and support to do that. The barriers included a lack of Northern Irish specific advice, information and resources, both in substantive law and procedural arrangements. The legal language, processes and expectations were difficult to navigate, given what was at stake. So in this research, for example, it was contact or custody of a child, dealing with domestic abuse, the loss of a business and therefore a livelihood. The levels of anxiety that people faced was heightened. And the research did an exercise where it asked personal litigants to complete a self-related general health questionnaire. It's a formal questionnaire recognised in research. And what that indicated was the prevalence of mental health amongst litigants was much higher at 59% compared with the findings in the general population, which was 17%. But what the research couldn't do was attribute whether that was to do with the fact that you were facing court proceedings without legal support, or the circumstances leading to the legal matter, so the breakdown of a relationship or the loss of a livelihood and a business, or some other factor. But nonetheless, it suggested that there is a real need to take account of mental well-being in the court system. What the procedural clinic found was that those who used it left them better equipped, more confident, and there were some examples of where it was put into practice to good effect. On the other hand, some of the people who had the access to the procedural support felt it was too little, too late. So it wasn't giving them legal advice on the substance, but it was telling them how the courts work and what their expectations were. What that research did was it led to the setting up of the Litigant in Person Reference Group. I'm the independent chair of that, and you have the details in your briefing that we've produced. And the aim of the reference group is to work towards providing a better experience for personal litigants. So it's done things like walkthroughs of the courts to actually say to the court, here are things that you can do, some of which don't actually entail significant resources to make things more user-friendly. Participating in court service working groups to ensure that litigants and persons' voices are considered alongside the other legitimate actors when you're preparing new policies, new arrangements. Publicising, for example, the Equal Treatment Bench Book, which is something that covers both tribunals as well as courts, and how you can more readily take into account people's disabilities in proceedings, and looking at things like embedding the concept of all parties being able to effectively participate in court arrangements, which we have in England and Wales, but we don't have the equivalent in Northern Ireland, and working, for example, with the School of Law at University, UU, and DOJ about improving information available to courts and tribunals. And I guess the reason I'm here today is that the reference group focuses on courts rather than tribunals, but nonetheless, many of the issues, frustrations, and remedies that face personal litigants identified in the research apply equally to industrial and fair employment tribunals, and some of the things that we can do, both in courts, apply equally to tribunals. And on that kind of note, I'll hand over to Catherine, who's been at the sharp end of this.
Thank you, Les. Forgive me if I do read from this today. I have a wonky memory. In November 2018, I suffered a concussion that, unbeknownst to me at the time, evolved into a very life-changing brain injury. Profoundly impacted me and caused me multiple disabilities, some of which were obvious, some not so obvious, and some I'm still adapting to and living with today. It was a catalyst for change in my life, and without it I wouldn't be here in front of you today, and I wouldn't also have endured the ordeal of the Industrial Tribunal. And that too has become a life-changing injury, unfortunately. Les has stole some of my thunder in referring to equal footing and our rights to justice and fairness, so I'll just go on to what I experienced briefly in my case. To begin with, I had no grounds rule hearing. When I first got to the Industrial Tribunal, I was faced with being online and there was no identification of what my needs may have been, despite my claim being a disability claim. That was written on my ET1 form. So that's obviously for the tribunal to know if there was any reasonable adjustments that may be necessary. The only reason my needs were assessed in the 7th hearing was because I forced the issue. Would you argue that a disability assessment was essential to placing me on an equal footing? Yes, I would definitely argue that. Was it fair for me to be assessed, to be put on an equal footing? Yes, definitely. I had no knowledge of legal terminology. I had no knowledge of the Industrial Tribunal rules or procedures. I knew nothing about law. I knew nothing about it at all. I had no idea that I was subject to any implied undertakings or there was any other rules outside that applied outside the Industrial Tribunal that would affect my life moving forward. Because of my cognitive disability, I didn't understand the procedures involved, so I didn't realise that I had to request discovery from respondents. It was put in writing for me. I received some emails telling me that I had a right to do that, but I couldn't process the actual information to know that I had that right to do that. So in the end, I didn't request discovery from any respondent because I couldn't. Where are we? Sorry. In emails I sent through to an Industrial Tribunal and the respondents' legal representatives during the 7th hearing, I described my need for a script. As you can see, I'm utilising it today. Maybe not very well, but I'm trying. But that communicated need was to ensure my effective participation in an adversarial situation. So unfortunately, that was ignored by the Industrial Tribunal. That was ignored by the legal representatives. I wrote my witness statement. It was very large and it was rejected in the end because I wrote so much. But I wrote my witness statement as a script for myself and I was told to rewrite it. Eventually, I was provided with a speaking note, but that speaking note was only given to me in the reconsideration hearing. So by the time I got the adjustment that I needed to effectively participate in the hearing, it was too late. I wasn't able to communicate my case and ultimately it went against me, which is just one of those things. Unfortunately, obviously, the Industrial Tribunal and the legal representatives involved were under a duty to inform me of the procedures that I would have to follow and what was expected of me, but they didn't do that. It was an opportunity for me to be taken advantage of because I had a cognitive disability, and I didn't know the law, I didn't know the procedures, I didn't know what was involved in order to present my case properly.
Catherine, sorry to interrupt, but do you mind if I ask, was it why you were unrepresented at that case? Was that because you were unable to find representation, or you weren't aware that there was representation available?
2 reasons. I was unable to afford it. I had to resign from my job, so by that stage I had no money. Any time that I went to the law centre and I contacted the bar, the Equality Commission, putting it politely, they just had no interest. Unfortunately, there's a lot of free legal advice spoken of in various areas, but whenever you come to try and access that, it's just impossible. It wasn't by choice. Unfortunately, definitely not by choice. I discovered my issues are really procedural, so obviously you can ask me questions about the various things that have happened, but I discovered in the judgment that the respondents hadn't actually agreed to our hearing bundle. So we spent time arranging emails back and forward, arranging a bundle, and I wasn't told by anybody that they actually disagreed with the bundle. So critical evidence that I had in my bundle that would have supported my case, that was dismissed by the Industrial Tribunal because they didn't agree to it. I don't want to take up too much time because I know you'll have a lot of questions. But the main reason I'm here today is to somewhat better the process to ensure that everybody is placed on an equal footing as required by law, which Les has already kind of covered, but in a very practical way it needs to be addressed, and that's why I'm here today.
Thank you very much. That was very powerful testimony, and I really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Maybe if I could just start, Les, maybe Equality Commission, you're on the Equality Commission? No.
No.
Human Rights Commission?
I used to be the Chief Commissioner at the Human Rights Commission, but I hadn't been there. I finished there in 2021, so I'm the independent chair of the reference group. It's not a paid role. One of the things it's worth saying is that reference group has a High Court judge. It has representatives from the Bar, the Law Society, School of Law at Ulster University, Disability Action, but it also has an equal number of people who've been through the court system as personal litigants. But it is an unfunded group, although the court service provide a secretariat. And that was one of the outworkings of the research. So the research was undertaken at a time when I was at the Commission. I was involved in the commissioning and of that as part of the Commission's work as a joint venture with the School of Law. But our reference group is confined to courts. It doesn't deal with tribunals, and that's because the realities are there are enough issues at court, but the parallels between the issues in court and the issues at industrial tribunals, and bear in mind industrial tribunals, there is no legal aid for representation at industrial tribunals, which is one of the reasons that Catherine, despite her lack of resources, couldn't easily access services. And I know the Law Centre does some sterling work in employment law. I used to head the Law Centre, but in terms of the amount of work that's out there for the resources that they have, the reality is, in most cases, it's not about whether they're interested. They simply don't have the numbers of people there to meet the need and the demand.
Sorry, just to follow up, in terms of the reference group, there is no similar group for, that looks at issues that emerge within the tribunal system. That is solely a court group. So the Department for Economy has no similar way of engaging with either legal experts, support organisations, or people who have lived experience, and that in itself is a significant gap.
Yeah, we've been very much left out in the cold.
Yeah, and do you think that's part of down to the fact that this employment tribunal sits within the Department for the Economy and not under the Department for Justice?
I think there are a number of different reasons. One is, yes, the organisation, the Department for Economy, it is responsible for employment and work-related issues and has that strategic oversight. And in many ways that could be beneficial. But as it stands, because many of the people who are in senior positions or operate senior positions are actually closer, you know, they're judges, they're barristers, are actually closer to the justice system. I do believe that if the Department for Economy took a strategic approach to the employment tribunal system and actually considered what measures need to be put in place in a holistic manner, it would make a big difference, and that's from end to end. You know, is there capacity to set up a reference group that the department could provide secretariat to? Is there funding for an advocacy service similar to the hate crime advocacy service that is funded by the Department for Justice? We host the Disability Hate Crime Advocate, who supports people from the point of experiencing an incident right through you know, the criminal justice system. There's also the opportunity to create a procedural clinic to offer people access to procedural advice, and I think more openness around the tribunal system would be really helpful, and a greater recognition of what reasonable adjustments are. Perhaps one of the most challenging barriers that I have experienced is when attempting to engage with the Department for the Economy. It's challenging, I even think, for them to navigate what is required, because this is such a disparate issue.
Yeah.
And they're probably so under-resourced that when I had raised the lack of service provision for disabled personal litigants experiencing suicidal ideation, their only option of a response was to direct us to a website and a video, because there simply are no services for people in the tribunal system, particularly those experiencing mental distress.
And in relation to the Equality Commission, I just want to see what role or support they provide to litigants. So obviously they have a legal responsibility to protect those under section.
When a person contacts the Equality Commission provides the initial advice around, you know, the procedures in terms of how to process a disability discrimination case, you know, how to raise it with the employer, what's expected, and all of that, right through to the process of how to complete your ET1 form. At that point, for many people, support can end, because demand is so high in the Commission services that they can only represent a certain number of people. So it tends to be cases that have a strategic impact or another reason, and they do have a framework through which they assess cases. And the lack, you know, the absolute number of disabled personal litigants who sit outside of that system is reflective of the lack of resourcing that the Commission receives. And similarly with the Law Centre, there's simply not enough resources for people to provide the extent of services that are required, because at the end of the day, as Les has outlined, the tribunal system operates like a court. And you know, we are not in a position to provide people with legal advice, you know, so.
No, totally get that. Kate?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing your experience. Probably should declare an interest that I agree generally with anything Les and Nuala say. So very happy to have you here. I'm in the committee. I was horrified, like really genuinely shocked at the statistics from your paper. 9 out of 10 personal litigants experiencing suicidal ideation during the process. It's you've made such a compelling case, and the fact that you don't receive funding and people are going through this, and the lack of knowledge, complexity of the process, magnitude of what's at stake, levels of anxiety. I mean, something does need to be done. What would you like us as a committee to do off the back of this briefing? Because I think everyone acknowledges that something has to change and it's unacceptable. What specific things would you like to see us do as a committee?
One action would be, obviously, one very quick action would be to write to the Minister outlining a number of recommendations that could be taken forward. I think Les has clearly outlined several in his input. There are a list of recommendations within the paper that we have. Some of these recommendations do not require resources. And I think that would initially, that could start an initial process. You might have a number of very specific recommendations, because we have engaged as a group with litigants in the development of the paper. And I think Catherine might have some priorities from that group that she would like to articulate.
Well, whenever you asked about the distinction between Department of Justice and for the economy, I was very quick to nod my head and say we need to be under a Justice Department. But Nuala was very articulate in explaining the practical aspects that the Department for the Economy might actually be able to assist in making us more an employee justice service instead of an employer protection service, because that's what it feels like to me at this minute in time. Really, the biggest thing I can ask for is practical assistance. The Law Centre and I recently discovered this. The Law Centre and I have created a guide on their website, which is actually hosted on the Industrial Tribunal website itself now. But it's blatantly clear that disability was left out of the equation whenever they were putting that guide together. As I stand now, I would be more cognitively able to engage with paper and communicating via online or via videos or whatever. But when I read that guide, I wasn't able to identify that they had a link that you could click within the guide itself, because they used colours that were almost similar to the headings in the guide. So there's various different things that you could actually take that guide and you could imprint it, but you could actually work with disabled people who are using the Industrial Tribunal system just to make it better, to make it more accessible, to make the language easier to understand. As I said earlier, there was things in writing that I just could not process. So even with you saying about bringing in, what did you say? Sorry, my memory's a bit wonky, as I've already said. Earlier about bringing in the more practical assistance. You have somebody in your team who helped, Joan?
Yes, so I suppose the challenge that we have is that we do try to provide practical assistance.
Yeah.
I think what Leah's outlined is exactly what happened to us in practice. When we don't have any services, but we do have a social security tribunal support service, which works really well. And even in cases where we have attempted for our member of staff who is very fluent in that arena to support litigants in person, it hasn't worked because of the challenges that Leah's outlined. Is that the system is so different that there isn't a good transfer of knowledge. So from our perspective, the early intervention point would be an employment advocacy service for disabled people that is funded by the Department for Economy, that actually acts as an early intervention point to resolve disability discrimination cases before they get to the stage where they're raised within the tribunal system. A procedural clinic where people can access, once they're in the system, where people can access procedural advice in an accessible manner. And if we consider that employment advocacy service, while I'm explaining that it should be about early intervention, that service should also see people right through the tribunal process so that no one is left alone. Because what we have found, I mean, you said the statistic there, like 9 out of 10 disabled personal litigants experiencing suicidal ideation, those are the people that are in my WhatsApp group. Not a group, I should say it's not a group, they have their own WhatsApp group, but I mean they're on my WhatsApp, and that's the only place they have to go because they've hit the end of the road. And what people need is assistance, support and humanity, to be treated like human beings, I think. Kindness.
Yeah. There's some very practical things, some of which aren't resource intensive. Better data, for a start. Now, I happen to believe that better data has to be a means to an end and not an end in itself. So that's the starting point. Some more information, better information that's Northern Ireland specific, brought up to date, more disability friendly, greater awareness and training of the Industrial Tribunal judiciary, including the Equal Treatment Bench Book, which the courts have said tribunals must have regard to. Access to then more access to information, advice and support. That could be done through tribunal resource units in the voluntary sector with some legal input. You could, but it's much more expensive, extend legal aid to tribunal representation, but on a case-by-case basis, I suspect that's a much more expensive way. I think a tribunal resource unit which has access to doing some tribunals, but also produces some information, but also has that procedural help. In other words, Catherine's a good example of explaining what the procedures are, taking you through what the expectations are. You have to bear in mind that industrial tribunals, most people will only ever go through them once in their life, and the same experience often applies in courts. So you're starting from a position of next to no knowledge. So those are some of the practical things that could be done, some of which are quick wins, some of which do have some resource implications. But in terms of the impact of this on people and costs elsewhere, even the relatively modest resources on things like a tribunal resource unit probably would pay for themselves in terms of the impact of improving people's experience and health and well-being of getting through what's a really difficult situation.
I mean, just highlighting what you've said there, in terms of paying for itself, I've been through an industrial tribunal where obviously I'm pretty biased. I may not have been treated fairly. I've been through the Court of Appeal, I've applied to the Supreme Court, and I've also applied to the European Court of Human Rights. How much money has that cost this country? So all it took for me, for my case, would have been an assessment at the beginning, a grounds rule hearing, an identification of what reasonable adjustments I may have been entitled to, a script to enable me just to participate, even just to feel like I could, to have it in front of me, and how much money would that have saved? So it's a very, very big thing, obviously, whenever the costs have yet to be decided, but I haven't paid. I've paid some money for the Supreme Court, but I haven't paid for any of it.
Thank you, Chair.
Problem at all. Diana.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you very much for coming today, and Catherine for giving us insight into what you've been through. It's very concerning, the hurdles that you're facing. It's a very formal procedure. Anything to do with the courts, for anyone, it's really challenging to go and put yourself in that place. So I really do sympathise. I was going to ask, you carried out research with 245 persons in litigation, and there must be many more out there, and those are the people you have identified. But are you aware of disabled people who have felt they can't even take that step? And how do you quantify that number as a representative of what is actually happening out there?
So you're entirely right. I think what we're seeing is that really the tip of the iceberg. And, we do provide employment services for disabled people through the Workable programme. And as I say, there isn't a dedicated advocacy element to that, although we do provide limited employment advocacy services in which there's early intervention. And we have had cases where people would have been in a position to raise a disability discrimination case, some of which we have been in a position to resolve in partnership with the employer. But there are definitely, I'm aware of cases where the people involved have just not had the energy, or that they've experienced such a level of mental distress because of the actual event or the experience in work that they don't go beyond. They haven't concluded the process that is happening within employment. So often, these issues arise whenever someone either raises a grievance or has a grievance raised against them, and that in itself, there's quite an extended process associated with that. Then there's a period in which a person can access conciliation, but often people are ill. They're no longer in employment, and they simply resign their posts. And I'm aware of a large population of people who have taken, that's the road that they have went down. And what we're seeing really is personal damage. It's damaged lives, damaged careers, and damaged futures.
And on another point on the conciliation service, I have here noted that, I don't know where I've written it down, that the under the judicial assessment, the department report that over the first 5 years, 79.5% of mediations were successful. And 23 cases were represented by litigants in person. And those litigants' conciliation process, what is the impact of that afterwards? It is settled, but really what is the impact on the litigation in person? Has that been measured as well?
Well, we have.
In their ability then to go back and to go back into the workplace as a result of this exercise, as a result of having to be through a conciliation process?
I suppose in terms of, again, obviously people that we would work with, experience tends to be people choose to move on from a role when this has happened. Because it takes incredible bravery and persistence to remain in an organisation in which you've had these challenges. So even when people go through mediation, yes, there can be positive outcomes and issues can be resolved, but equally there can be people who sit outside of that positivity. Les, did you want to add to that?
There is both a formal alternative dispute resolution procedure in industrial tribunals. It hasn't taken off the way it was anticipated. And then there's the work of the Labour Relations Agency. My experience of the Law Centre with the Labour Relations Agency was a really useful means of often conciliating an agreement. The stats, they're now quite old, but suggest that most people don't go back into the workplace. They end up taking some form of compensation. My other experience when I was at the Law Centre was that employment cases often get settled way under the value of what they're worth, because the simple fear of going to a tribunal if you have a disability means that a small amount of money to effectively go away is often grabbed at, because the fear of kind of representing yourself and the lack of access to an alternative. The value of either a law centre that does some strategic employment work or the Equality Commission. And the other part of this is quite often you'll see when the Equality Commission either settle a case or it goes to a tribunal and wins a case, part of the outcome is not just compensation or back to work for the individual, but it's a sitting down with the employer to say, how do you make sure this never happens again? Get your procedures in order, possibly proper training. So you have a structure there so that kind of strategic approach is really valuable as well, so that you don't simply settle one case and there's 3 more happen in the next few months. So you can see how having both a strategic and a kind of, for cases that are perhaps more routine, does make some sense. And we've got a limited number of strategic resources, but not much to deal with the day-to-day cases. And that's part of where the problem lies.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, thank you. All 3 of you. You've answered really, and you give us such a detail. It's hard to. You've covered nearly everything I was going to ask, but can I just around numbers and just to give us a scale of what we're talking about here? What on an annual basis, how many people are we? You're talking about tip of the iceberg of what was, but how many people would be affected by this? Is there a rough?
So I think beyond really looking at, because Les has outlined there really hasn't been a report on this since 2012, so it's really difficult to see. It's really difficult to see the full extent. What we do know is that over 50% of the phone calls to the Equality Commission's discrimination helpline are from disabled people, and the Equality Commission receive well over 100,000 calls a year. So if there's a substantial amount of this affects a substantial amount of people. But we've all been in a workplace, or we're all part of a workplace at some point. Like in this room, I'm raising we've all, we know that employment takes up a large part of people's lives, and I'm sure from all of our personal experiences in employment settings, sometimes we can become aware of situations in which aren't healthy for people, or in which things have been said which shouldn't have been said, or procedures have been enacted, And I think even from our own lived experience, if we reflect on that, you can begin to understand that this is really seems to be something that is of a scale that is, it's almost normalised, I would say. And we've a long way to go before we can say as a society we have workplaces across the board that promote equality and respect.
This is a damning answer in itself. I don't know. And the reason I don't know is, as I say, there hasn't been an annual report produced by the Office of Industrial Tribunals since 2012, 2013. But they keep the stats, so it's not that they can't be made available. The Labour Relations Agency does produce an annual report, and you'll get figures there about the numbers of people involved in the conciliation cases going to industrial tribunals. So the figures are kept, they're just not in terms of tribunals published. And that's one thing that practically, I guess, the Economy Committee you can do, which is to get those figures out into the public domain. And as I say, it's a starting point. Good data has to be a means to an end. It has to have a purpose. It's not simply just if we get the data, when it's what we do with it and what we understand from it. So again, that's a very practical thing that could be done that really has next to no resources associated with it.
I was going to kind of ask you, around sort of what budget level, but I think you need to take a step back and get that data, is it, first, and then we can work out what the departments. Maybe that's something, Chair, we can.
Just on that point, Chair, sorry, we're actually setting up a new all-party group on public data and policy and how we better inform. So that's something that we can raise as well.
Sinead?
Thank you very much to everybody for your presentation, and Catherine, a very powerful testimony was given, and it kind of really explains just I suppose maybe the difficulties and the dysfunctionality of the current system. Les, there was quite a number of recommendations made in the paper there, but one of the very first one around cultural change. You alluded to work that is happening in other jurisdictions. Can you maybe elaborate, where is doing this a lot better than we are here? And is the system maybe been looked after under the judicial process rather than the employment department as well? So could you maybe just talk to other jurisdictions?
Yeah, and this is slightly depressing. England and Wales, I think, this issue is not common to Northern Ireland. In England and Wales, and it was motivated by much more significant cuts to legal aid than we faced in Northern Ireland. And that's, I think, something that we should be kind of grateful for. We didn't face what were called cuts under a piece of legislation called LASPO. And that led to far more in the courts, personal litigants than here. But in England and Wales, for example, you have civil procedural rules. We don't have the equivalent in courts here. Now, included in those civil procedural rules is a requirement on the court to ensure, wherever possible, that all the parties can participate as effectively as possible. So it starts by saying that's one of your roles in a court, is to ensure effective participation. Now, where I think England and Wales are still to get to is the tools of making sure that happens, but at least there's a kind of framework and an infrastructure. It would do no harm if we had something similar for both tribunals and courts in Northern Ireland, because at least it starts by saying, here's the framework. Publicising and embedding as best as possible the Equal Treatment Bench Book. It has some real virtues. It's a practical guide for judges and others about how do you make sure people can have their disabilities taken into account. It has a chapter on mental disability, physical disability, has a range of chapters, has one specifically around working with personal litigants in the courts. It applies to Northern Ireland. The Gallo case that I started quoted at the start has said that effectively the Equal Treatment Bench Book should be used by industrial and fair employment tribunals. We can do work to make sure that's publicised and again embedded through awareness and practice. So there are some things in England and Wales. Sadly, they were motivated more by cuts to legal services that meant there were even more personal litigants in courts in England and Wales than in Northern Ireland. But those are some of the things. But frankly, there isn't a silver bullet in the sense of you can say here is a country that's got it absolutely right, and personal litigants are really, really supported. And just to kind of mention that the one thing about the research in Northern Ireland was we found a whole range of reasons why people were going unrepresented. Some of it was to do with ability to afford it. Some of it was to do with a choice. And the interesting thing was the choice was, well, it's paying for lawyers is expensive. Is it better to, do I want to spend more on my kids' education or some other purpose than lawyers? And the interesting thing we found in the research was that people who were quite well educated, who thought I can navigate the system, actually probably ended up worse off than those who completely floundered, because the people who completely floundered, the courts recognised at an early stage they were floundering. The people who thought, well, I've got a degree, I can go online, I can find information, which in courts case, family courts was nearly always England and Wales based, although we're doing something about that now through UU School of Law, actually fared worse because they didn't realise that navigating this system is really, really difficult. And the courts then, because they saw somebody who was standing before them who appeared to be well educated in a professional job, it was actually quite more difficult to deal with. And the courts, and I suspect the same for tribunals, courts find it easier to deal with if both parties are unrepresented, or if both parties are legally represented. But if one is unrepresented and the other is legally represented, that presents formidable challenges for judges, whether that's in industrial tribunals or in courts.
Nuala, you have suggested that the judges at tribunals are not well equipped, just coming on from what Les has just said there now, to manage the litigants in person. But we have been told by the department that all employment judges have received training for people who are vulnerable. Do you think that training is effective, or can more be done? And that's part of some of the recommendations, in relation to in-court support and the judicial support. But can you maybe talk a wee bit about just the training and the training needs of the judges and those engaged?
So I have actually, met with the president of the tribunal service and with DFE. And certainly, from that meeting, it was clear that there are really good intentions. But when we look at issues around disability and disabled people across society, they can be very much misunderstood. So even terminology that is used is very much out of date. And sometimes, if you're looking at some of the issues that have been raised by litigants at the back of the paper and how they feel they were communicated with, it is clear from the evidence that we have that there is particularly a lack of understanding about disability that is associated with experiences of mental distress, and how forms of communication can be triggering for people who are, going through the industrial tribunal process. And this is one of the most significant challenges, because there's a complete lack of awareness, I think, of how, if you have someone, for example, who has a diagnosis that involves mental distress, some form of, the language, even the medical language in this here is very, very difficult. So if you're talking about someone who has a diagnosis of an emotionally unstable personality disorder or anxiety, some of the language that is used can be very distressing, and then there is no wraparound support available for those people, and I think that is the biggest gap in knowledge. Experiences of mental distress are largely invisible, so when that person enters into the tribunal system, it's not immediately apparent It's not immediately apparent to a judge, a barrister, or any member of the tribunal system what adjustment may be required. And that's why when Catherine had spoken about, having access to a ground rules hearing, being aware of the equal treatment bench book, and having some kind of early process that really looks at who is the person who is engaging within the tribunal, what are their issues and how have these arisen, and how can we avoid re-traumatising people. I mean, there are some people that we've engaged with that use language to say they feel that the process is abusive to them because it's a process that re-traumatises people, and we know this from other legal processes. We know that legal processes can re-traumatise people. I guess what we need is a solution, and whether that is offering wraparound support or training or all of those measures, something definitely needs to change.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Patrick?
Thanks, Chair. Look, to be honest, all my questions have been answered. I think it was really, really detailed presentation. And I think, from ourselves as a committee, I think the most useful thing is listening to personal experiences and listening to that real life experience. So, Catherine, thanks very much for your presentation and outlining your experience. And I suppose going forward, to me, it's what do we do from here? It's listening to other people who have had similar experiences and what the learning for department is, because as you've touched on already, we can look at the statistics, we can look at the data, and that's all vital too. But until we hear personal experiences, then we're not getting the real insight from yourselves. So, look, as I say, all my questions have been answered. Really appreciate the detail you've given so far. So, thanks.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you very much for that. We'll follow up with both the department and with the tribunal service itself to raise a number of issues and concerns that we as a committee have, and we'll be in touch to share the outcome of that with you. But on behalf of the committee, firstly to you, Catherine, can I really pay tribute to you coming along here today. Nuala, you continue to strongly advocate for persons with disabilities, so thank you. And Les, next time I see you, you'll have another hat on, no doubt, but a very important one as always. So thank you. Thank you very much, as always.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
No problem, thank you. Okay, I'm just going to firstly follow up on actions from our previous session with the department. So there was a number of issues that were raised. Firstly, Mr. Honeyford had raised about energy mapping exercise across Northern Ireland, but also in relation to the Crown Estate. So if we can follow up with that. Kate had raised the issue of which items within the software action plan had been started this year, that said would start this year, but if we could find out details on that. Gary asked for an update, but I missed it. If you're not there, Gary, if you could just follow. Oh yeah, you asked for something, but I missed it, so my apologies.
Yes, it was just in relation to the skills strategy, and basically in terms of what work that they have done in terms of the within the existing structures, basically how they're widening participation and inclusion, as well. So yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Sinead rightly raised a number of issues. So firstly, in relation to the investment zone, so if we can seek an update from the department in relation to that, both in terms of it now being confirmed by the Chancellor, but also any meetings that Minister has taken place today in London, and also if we can get sight of the regional profiles, which the department say indicated some of their action plans on that, and share that with members. Was there anything else on that, members, that I had missed? No? Clark, was there anything that I had missed? No, okay, no problem. Just in relation to the evidence session we just had there, firstly, if the committee is content, can we just formally write to Catherine to thank her for her representations and highlight the important role that I've had. And if we could do that in letter form, I know we try to save money by sending letters and emails, but letters through the post have more impact and show a bit more effort, so let's do that. we contact the department in relation to any consideration they're given on to a number of issues. So, firstly, there had been some previous discussion that this responsibility may transfer from the Department for the Economy to the Department for Justice. We may wish just to first of all seek if that's still the intention of the ministers to do that, and any consideration that they're giving to the creation of an advocacy service funded by the department. We may also wish to write to the current president of the relevant tribunal to ask for his take in term, or his or her, apologies, take on the evidence that's been presented to committee and any mitigations that they have put in place and any further plans that they have. And any member, anything else they want to raise on that one? Okay, we're content on that. We then move to item 8, members, which is delegated legislation, public interest disclosure. The Department for the Economy is to delay a statutory rule, the Public Interest Disclosure Prescribed Persons Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2024. Information of which has been provided at the Clerk's covering note at page 455. The proposed rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure and will come into operation 21 days after it has been laid. The Public Interest Disclosure Northern Ireland Order 1998 gives protections to whistleblowers who raise concerns by making a protected disclosure about dangerous or illegal activity that they are aware of in the workplace. The proposed SR updates the parent legislation to make clear that matters relating to the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act 2024 are covered by the entry in the schedule of the Competition and Markets Authority, and that these matters relating to the Communications Act 2003 and Online Safety Act 2003 are covered by the entry for the Office of Communications. Members have any concerns or questions on this one? If not, are members content that the department make the associated rule? Is that agreed? Right, okay. Then move on to correspondence, members, starting at page 460. The first one is members are asked to note a copy of the Social Enterprise Action Plan, which includes measures supporting public sector procurement from the social enterprise sector and proposed dedicated capital loan scheme. The department has asked that we don't make public comment on this until the 21st of November, its official launch, and will request that officials come and brief committee on that. Are members content? Thank you. Item 3, members are asked to note information from the department on tuition fee loan support for the Graduate Medical Entry Medicine School at Magee. Queen's University has expressed some concern. DFE indicates that there will be engagement with stakeholders on whether tuition fee support should be extended to other graduate entry subjects and second degrees more generally. It appears that the changes are to be introduced with no DEL costs to the Northern Ireland Block Grant. Obviously, then they'll be covered by AME funding. Is the committee content to write to the department to determine if primary legislation is needed and to determine if the executive has agreed the related cross-cutting measures?
Agreed.
Members content? Sinead?
Chair, I think this is a really good news story, and it should be replicated for other courses as well, particularly where we have difficulties. Getting trained people where there's gaps in skills. We should really be thinking of those type of incentives, and that really encourages people to take up those courses that we desperately need for our economy.
We can highlight to the department of the committee does support this expansion to other courses, to other institutions and to other campuses. So we're agreed on that. Item 4 then, members are asked to note a departmental response to the committee queries in respect of HE funding. The review will start in early 2025 and has a 1-year timeline. Are members content to note at this stage? Thank you. Item 5, members are asked to note departmental correspondence which advises of the publication of the annual report and accounts for the year end 31st of March 2024 is delayed until the end of this month. Are members content to note? Thank you. Members are asked to note a copy of the general consultation letter on the proposed amendments to the insolvency and director disqualification legislation, which all members will have received already. Are members content to note? Thank you. Item 7 is in relation to information from the department confirming that it has put forward a 3-year bid for the £15 million support for the local economic partnerships. The department also confirms that the target for Invest NI investment activity outside of BMAP is 65%. Members may wish to note a reference at page 488 in the correspondence from the Minister to Invest NI, which seems to imply that the 65% BMAP target is equivalent to 75% of Invest NI activity outside of Belfast City. So just a number of issues to flag to members. Firstly, when the Permanent Secretary was here, they told us that the £15 million was already secured, and that was within the current departmental budget. Obviously, that's not the case. That the Minister has made bids for that funding to support the local economic partnerships, which are the outcome of the sub-regional economic plans. Anyone want to raise anything on this one? No. Okay, content to note. Item 8 then is page 497. Members are asked to note a copy of the Weights and Measures report for the period 1st of April 2020 to 31st of March 2023. Content to note. Yep. Item 9. Members are asked to note correspondence from the Minister on a statement to the Assembly on the 11th of November on a recent North-South Ministerial Council meeting. Members content? Item 10. Members are asked to note the oral statement by the Minister of Finance on the Chancellor's statement. Members content to note. Item 11. Members are asked to note a response to the PFG from the Northern Ireland Skills Council. Members content to note. Thank you. Item 12. Members are asked to note a programme for government response from young people at St Peter's Immaculatus Youth Centre in Belfast. Members content to note. And fair play to them, because when I was a young person, I certainly wasn't responding to programme for government consultations. So important. Members are asked then to note UCAS October early deadline data covering applications for Northern Ireland students at Oxford and Cambridge to medicine, dentistry and veterinary science. Members content to note. Item 14. Members are asked to consider an invitation to the Chair to a conferral event for Joe Kennedy III on Wednesday the 13th of November 2024. Are members content that I attend that this afternoon? Item 15 at page 550. Members are asked to consider the interim CMA report in the infant formula pricing and consumer information. The report notes that parents could save around £400 per year by buying compliant infant formula, which is not the market leader, and recommends that relevant information be made available to parents in the healthcare setting. Members content to note. And item 16, members are asked to note further copies of correspondence to the Northern Ireland Audit Office and the Minister in respect of RHI. Are members content to note? Okay, do members have any queries on correspondence? No. Item 10, forward work plan. Members, just as presented. Obviously our clerk isn't here, so if members are content as is, we'll pick this up again next week. Any other business, Sinead? Sorry, I couldn't bring you back in earlier. Did you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, it was just around the FDA. Jonathan indicated, that they have very little time and all that there. We all know that. The bottom line is it's where the jobs go. And I had originally asked the question about the cyber jobs, and 95% of the jobs were in the Greater Belfast area. So this is not about where people, investors come to visit. It's actually where the jobs are placed. And I think that there was a bit of disconnect in some of the conversations afterwards.
No problem at all. Thank you for that, Sinead. Is there any other business that members wish to raise?
I'm happy, Chair. I'm not getting in for a to and fro here, but I do think that particularly, and I do note in the report that 95% of those jobs are within the Belfast region, but equally it was dismissed, the fact being that many of these jobs are remote. And, evidence here today are 3 FOIL members are joining a committee in Belfast remotely. There is no, we can't dismiss the technological advances, and indeed also the ability now for our workforce to be dispersed right across Northern Ireland and still play a pivotal role. My point was, we continually talk about FDI visits as if that is a broad calculation of where FDI goes. These businesses know exactly what they're doing whenever they come to Northern Ireland in terms of reviewing and looking at different areas. My point as a member that's not from the Northwest and not from Belfast is that I want to see jobs targeted to where they best fit into the Northern Ireland economy, and sometimes I think we lose preference in that in this committee.
Everyone's points are on the record and well made, so thank you very much for that. If there is no other business, members will also pick up our committee strategic plan with Peter when he returns next week, and at that stage then we will close our meeting, and can I thank you all for your attendance.
Committee Room 30, Sound.